Siblings and sisters and brothers, welcome to Thursdays for the Soul. It is so good to be with you in this way on this day and all the days in which you are engaging this thereafter. Thursdays for the Soul is a webinar series to care for the whole church. Our topics are wide-ranging and are focused on the spirituality and the care of people. There's prayer, there's worship, sometimes there's music, psalm readings, or like today, compassionate teachings are all included. I am so excited to listen in on this conversation with each one of you today. We're going to talk about water is life, and to deny water is to deny life. Today's conversation is around the sacred nature of water and the ways it's weaponized against non-white communities. Gonna trouble the water. Ecojustice, water, and environmental racism decenters water as commodity and centers the dignity of water and its life-giving character. But let me say no more. I want to introduce to you Rachel Hackenberg, the managing editor and publisher of the Pilgrim Press, who will introduce this esteemed panel of folks to speak to us about water.
Thank you so much, Chris, and welcome everyone. It's really lovely to see you, to be in this space together, to have the opportunity to share a book with you that, the Pilgrim Press is very excited about, but not just excited because we are people who love books, but because it's an important book. And the work and discussion of caring for water and caring for all of life is an important conversation. And the Pilgrim Press is simply pleased to be part of the conversation and bring the voices to you through the book, Gonna Trouble the Water. The Pilgrim Press is a 400-year young publishing tradition. We pursue words that are put together in such a way that we might seek more truth and more light together. I want to introduce two folks to you and then turn it over to them. My colleagues, Brooks Berndt is on the screen. He serves in the United Church of Christ National setting as the Minister for Environmental Justice. And Brooks will help facilitate our panel in our conversation. So as we go and as you hear snippets of the book and as you have questions, I hope you will put them in the chat. Brooks will be paying attention to that. Katie and others who are colleagues on this screen will be paying attention to the questions for discussion. And then let me introduce to you the editor of Gonna Trouble the Water and also a writer for Gonna Trouble the Water. This is Dr. Miguel A, a scholar activist who's tenured as a professor of social ethics and Latinx studies at Isle School of Theology in Colorado. In addition to Gonna Trouble the Water, he has published over 35 books. And I'm just gonna stop right there, like 35 books. Even for a publisher, I just, whoo! Several of those books have won national awards. And I just have to tell you, in addition to Gonna Trouble the Water, he also has a new book out called Decolonizing Christianity, Becoming Badass Believers. And it's not from the Pilgrim Press. And I'm telling you, I still want to recommend it to you. So go buy Gonna Trouble the Water at thepilgrimpress.com and then go find Decolonizing Christianity, Becoming Badass Believers, wherever you buy your books. But first, please welcome and enjoy some conversation with Dr. De La Torre and contributors of the book who he will introduce.
Thank you very much for that introduction. The book came out of a conversation among several scholars of color who are concerned about the environment. When we think about environmental degradation, the conversation usually is led by and is discussed using Eurocentric thoughts and ideas. What is missing from the conversation, I believe, is the voices from the underside of history, specifically the voices that are most affected by the destruction of our environment. The school with which I'm associated decided to bring together scholars, not just religion scholars, but different type of scholars, lawyers or journalists, activists, to have a conversation among ourselves concerning what is water to our communities of color? The conversation was so good that we knew we had to put it into a book. And that's how this book came together. It is a conversation among ourselves that we want to share with the audience at large. So that's how that book was developed. And the book's focus is really on environmental justice from the margins of society. And one of the contributors of the book, who I like to introduce so that he can begin the conversation, is my dear colleague, Rudolf Reyes. And I'm sure he will tell you the good news as to where he will be beginning his professorship.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today, and that's some news that definitely will be coming out very soon of where I'll be starting as being a professor. I'm glad to be here with you all. I'm going to read a little excerpt from my chapter, Beyond the Prophetic Temptation of Ecological Discuss, and discuss a little bit about it. So I'll begin with reading a little bit of the excerpt. The question that animates this chapter is one asked by writer, poet, and activist Eli Clare. How do we witness, name, and resist the injustice that reshapes and damages all kinds of body minds, plants and animal, organic and inorganic, non-human and human, while not equating disability with injustice? There are a variety of responses to this question. One is a non-disabled response. This response may be one of puzzlement because of the belief that disability is something to be avoided and hopefully one day cured. Another one is a disabled response. This response understands the question differently. How can I witness, name, and resist injustice without hating myself? Or put another way, how do I resist injustice without supporting ableist ideologies? Disability liberation is not liberation from particular embodiments, but rather liberation from a disabling society. As a neurodivergent Chicano, I know that there is no eco-justice without both racial and disability justice. My neurodivergence is my birthright. I did not acquire my disability. This difference requires me to listen to those voices who have acquired disabilities and wrestling with the question of resisting injustice without equating disability with it. The main argument of this chapter is for the reframing of the problem of water pollution because of the use of the prophetic temptation of the ecological discuss to mobilize action. My goal in this chapter is for those fighting for eco-justice to struggle with Eli Clare's question of witnessing, naming, and resisting injustice without making disability itself the injustice. I link Clare's critique in environmental awareness campaigns with eco-critic Sarah Jaquette Ray's concept of ecological discuss. I find that what Clare critiques is a form of ecological discuss. This ecological discuss is one manifestation of prophetic temptation. And I will end there. So my chapter is really concerned with this concept I like to call the idea of prophetic temptation, which is when we're trying to mobilize others towards a cause, we can use both shared dominance, so kind of a privileged position, and also the expedience of that to get others involved into justice issues. But what that means is that we take certain communities and kind of use them as the expense to try to get done what we need to do. And particularly this happens in terms of with the disability community and also disabled people of color within environmental issues. And a quick example of thinking of a prophetic temptation is also the idea of the straw ban, right? So straw, like it's a good one in terms of wanting to limit straws, plastic straws, but not necessarily seeing them as an access device, particularly for certain disabled people. And so what happens is that then they become the brunt of a straw ban because they either have to request for it or because of the assumption of people towards people with disabilities, there can be assumption that someone doesn't need it. And so that's an example of the prophetic temptation. In particular, in my chapter, I look at campaigns around lead in water, that we definitely want to get lead out of water because it harms the body. But then how do we go about getting people to mobilize towards this action? And oftentimes it's to focus on that someone could acquire learning disabilities, right? Or dealing with loss of IQ points. And this does two things in that, in terms of one, it obscures kind of the environmental racism in the fact of a lot of times communities of colors are the ones who are infected by lead in water. But also it does a prophetic temptation because it uses disability as a reason to get people motivated and involved. And so that's, again, a prophetic temptation of using ecological disgust, that, you know, somehow disability is not something to be desired or wanted. And when you do those together, it does a couple things. As I said, it obscures environmental racism, but it also leaves aside communities of color and also disabled people of color who get lost in that. And they end up becoming more props and kind of left aside once they get people involved, rather than looking at more the larger issues. And of course, since this is my chapter, I could say more, but I'll end there in terms of very much just wanting us to wrestle with how do we seek justice without equating it with disability, and always being mindful of not engaging a prophetic temptation to use other communities to try to get other people involved. So thank you.
Let me go ahead and introduce another one of the contributors of the book, and that is my dear colleague, Jennifer Lees, whom I have the pleasure of teaching with on occasions.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be a part of this of this collection, and I'd like to just share a bit from my chapter 3, Waterways, Paths of Freedom and Justice for All. The materiality of water becomes a metaphor for liberative living. Through a remembrance of oppressive and liberating waterways, this chapter invites a renewed intentionality about cohering with and adhering to water among those committed to eco-justice as freedom and justice for all. First, water is attracted to polar molecules, which means that water is prone to connect with other molecules. This is expressed in both cohesion and adhesion. That is, water molecules are attracted to other water molecules, cohesion, and they are attracted to molecules of different substances, adhesion. This dual attraction is a consequence of water's polarity, which is the result of hydrogen bonding. Two important consequences of water's cohesiveness are surface tension, in which molecules at the surface form stronger bonds, and the liquidity of water at moderate temperatures. In addition to cohesion with other water molecules, the adhesion of water occurs when it adheres to any molecule with which it can form hydrogen bonds. Because of the partially positive ends of the hydrogen in water and the partially negative ends of the oxygen in most forms of glass, water has a stronger attraction to glass than it does to itself. As a result, there's a capillary action whereby water appears to crawl up glass tubes in which it is contained. This is why we see a negative meniscus at the surface of water in a tube. It has been said, and scientists have gone to great lengths to confirm, that opposites attract. For water, this works in two ways. On one hand, it means that water is attracted to itself. The slightly positive charged hydrogen and the slightly negatively charged oxygen sides of water connect. On the other hand, that the positive charge of the hydrogen is stronger than the negative charge in oxygen means that water can be attracted to that which is negatively charged outside of itself. That is, water looks for difference in order to form new bonds, and it is even willing to separate from itself. As it coheres and adheres, water literally prophesies the wisdom of Mary McLeod Bethune, Mary Church Terrell, Fanny Chapin, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, and other club women in and beyond the National Association of Colored Women, who coined the motto, lifting as we climb. As these Black club women discerned, it was essential to the best of their character and to their survival to stick together and with one another and other Black women who needed support as they allowed a kind of capillary action to draw them up the sides of the society in which they found themselves contained. Perhaps recognizing these principles of water: one, that water is attracted to polar molecules; two, that water has an unusually high specific heat; three, that water has a relatively high heat of vaporization; four, that ice, the solid form of water, has a relatively low density that is relative to liquid water; and five, that water itself has a relatively high polarity. We might make waterways of freedom and justice for all. My chapter is looking at the very materiality of water, its properties, its qualities, and trying to discern how these properties and qualities might help us to understand how we should be. Taking a cue from Adrienne Marie Brown in Emergent Strategies and her quotation of Bruce Lee, be like water. And we are reminded to be like water. We are 2/3 water, but there are ways that we aren't always like the water that we are. We don't always lean into ourselves in that aspect of our identity. I believe, and I developed the idea through this chapter, that we can understand water as a medium for justice, as a way that we can not only be like justice, but that we can find justice in new ways. And that there are ritualistic and cultural ways that we have, as women, people of African descent, understood water in this way. And there are those who have led us toward freedom, like Harriet Tubman, who have read the water and who have been like water. And that we too, in this day, in this time, as we pursue justice, can also be like water, and understanding water in its physical qualities and nature a bit better. We might better understand the richness and the fullness of these possibilities for freedom and justice within our communities.
Thank you so much. I also have a chapter in the book, which I like to read a portion from. The chapter is called Water, a Living Spirit. And let me read a small section. If indeed the worldview of the majority of the Earth's indigenous peoples are closer to reality than the Eurocentric neoliberal worldview, which is rooted in the colonizing capitalist philosophical trend rooted in Christianity and the so-called Age of Enlightenment, then to own water becomes a form of enslavement, not just for the living entity associated with water, but upon those who depend on the water. To impose Eurocentric worldview upon the planet's inhabitants extends a global oppression which enriches a minority of the global population while creating the illusion of white supremacy, which confuses unearned riches from natural resources with advanced civilization. Once water is stripped of its spiritual entity and reduced to a commodity, it can be manipulated to benefit the global minority at the expense of the global majority. Stewardship of the Earth's resources requires creating a harmonious relationship with nature, as with other human beings. Water is not to be enslaved, sold, or mistreated. To do so creates pollution, lowers life expectancy, and becomes the source of illness and disease for those living close to abused waterways. those who are predominantly non-European. The exploitation of the Earth's water and the exploitation of the Earth's disenfranchised are interconnected, making it difficult, if not impossible, to speak of one without mentioning the other. Water, or the Earth itself, may be a living entity. However, the white Eurocentric neoliberal economic worldview has reduced these living elements to a creature to be used, misused, and abused for the profit by a chosen few. In this particular chapter, I'm influenced from my social location as a Caribbean boy. Those of us from the island have recognized that unlike Eurocentric theology, we could hold different religious traditions at the same time. So in an article I once wrote, it was titled, "I am a Roman Catholic Southern Baptist Santero, deal with it." And what I was trying to argue in that article is that just because my views of religion change doesn't mean I leave behind those religious traditions that have shaped my very identity. And in this article, I am channeling the religious experience of the Yoruba people. These were the enslaved, what we call today Nigerians, who were brought to Cuba and influenced our religious milieu. And in that tradition, we have Yemaya, who is the goddess of the ocean, and Ochun, who is the goddess of the rivers. These are living entities, and the ocean and the rivers are also living entities. But not just water, the mountains are living entities. The rocks themselves sing the glories of God. All of Earth is alive, not just humans, not just animals, not just trees and plants. Everything has life. And if I take this teaching from our Yoruba ancestors, then what I begin to do in this chapter is look at other indigenous traditions throughout the world, Asia, of course, Africa, pre-Christian Europe, North American indigenous traditions. And I noticed that each one of these traditions looks at water as sacred living beings. And if that is true, what then is our relationship to this water? Can we own it? Can we abuse it? Can we make money off of it? Or is it part of our very being? And I think that is where the chapter truly wrestles. And I will pause there and hand it over.
Well, thank you so much to each of our authors. You have given us a tremendous gift to the church as a whole. So thank you, and thank you for introducing us to this wonderful book. I think, in this audience, we probably have some preachers in the audience. And so my question for you, for any one of our guest authors today, is if someone's receiving these ideas for the first time that you talk about in your chapter, what might be a good starting point, a story or a metaphor for people as they receive these ideas, which might be new to them? Are there any thoughts that you might have? And Jennifer, I know your chapter in particular is full of metaphors. And so I was just thinking as a preacher the entire time I was reading that chapter. And there's so many good things to each chapter. So anybody that would like to tackle that question and think about how to people can hear and receive these ideas.
Thank you for this question. I think that there are wonderful metaphors for sure in how we understand and think about water. And as Dr. Della Torre was noting these other aspects of the ecosystem of which we are a part, I think that what this text challenges us to do, and my chapter in particular, is to just to identify with these other elements more fully and more completely, more naturally. Recognizing what it is to have a boiling point, right? That water has a boiling point reminds us that we ourselves have boiling points. Our circumstances, our social conditions can reach boiling points. And what is possible when we reach such points is transformation, is the development into another aspect of our form, of our of our substance into new form. And so the fact that we can move from ice to liquid to gas is part of the way that we adopt and adapt the water that is us. And I think that when we affiliate and associate with water in this more personalized and material way, it helps us to understand the fact that water can't be owned, as Dr. De La Torre put it. When we understand ourselves as water, and we understand that we cannot be owned, we better understand that water can't be owned. And so I think living into the metaphors is important. And to there are other aspects, I think, that and possibilities for connection with soon to be Dr. Reyes's work as well. But I will leave those to him to make. I see some and look forward to further dialogue here.
Thank you so much for that. One
Right.
thing that would you like to jump in there? Go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing, because you did mention the preachers in the room and how they could enter into this conversation. As an alumni of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, where I learned how to become a minister, I have to confess that probably some of the damage that was done is how I was taught to read the Bible. In other words, I was taught to read the Bible through the eyes of a Eurocentric worldview. And that basically meant one that is rooted in capitalism, one that is rooted in most likely urban settings, one that is rooted in a colonial venture. And what that does is that it prevents me from truly reading the text from the perspective of those for whom the texts were written. Particularly people who work with the earth, people who lived in what today we call the rural areas. If I can learn to read the text connected to nature that way, then those Psalms that talk about the earth singing the glories of God begin to make sense. While before I just say, oh, that's an interesting metaphor, that's kind of cute. But in this point, I'm wondering if the text is being literal and actually talking about how all of nature is actually singing songs. And if that's true, how do I learn to listen to the rocks? How do I learn to listen to the river? And I think that is one way using the biblical text to enter into this conversation.
Thank you for that. Rudy, you look like you might have something to say. Would you like to jump in on that?
Yeah, going back to metaphor, I think it's great the use of metaphor, and particularly I think my engagement with the Chicana X tradition is very have a poetic imagination. And also I know also from disability circles too is the need to be careful with our metaphors, because sometimes a lot of times disability metaphors will be used particularly even with the environment or stuff like, let's say it's scarred or different things like that can be very harmful, because then again, it's equating disability as injustice. Somehow it's to cure a certain disability when we use that language. And oftentimes it's used again to want people to intervene, right? That it just naturally goes, that kind of that language. So one would be just both, I think, the necessity of metaphors, but also kind of the danger that can be in them when we use them without knowing the harm that it can do.
Thank you for that response. Another question I know that is popping up in the UCC a lot recently pertains to the rights of nature. We have a resolution coming before our next General Synod. I believe we could become the first denomination to affirm the rights of nature. You know, and in that conversation, this is to caricature it a little bit, but something I've heard from activists is, you know, I like the rights of nature, but we don't do very good with, you know, making sure that humans' rights are respected right now. And so I'm just curious how you navigate that kind of conversation, because Miguel, I know in your chapter you speak really forthrightly to you know, water having its own rights and possessing its own rights, and I'm sure, you know, there's lots of nuances and complexities to go in there, whether we're talking about moral or legal. But I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that conversation and how you enter into it.
When we speak about the rights of nature, it's really not an either or with the rights of human. Both are equal. If I abuse nature, I'm abusing humans. And to abuse humans is to abuse nature. It's not separable. They're connected, they're united. The fact that I am polluting the waterways means that I am violating the rights of humans who depends on that water for clean water to drink and survive. So I can't separate one from the other. I think Leonardo Boff is the one that writes about the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor. And what he's saying in his book is that you can't exclude nature and the earth just for the sake of humans. So I hesitate in making that separation. And also, you're absolutely right. The rights of humans are not being respected, nor the rights of nature. And I think what we need to do is be pushed to respect those rights. And maybe just one final thing. The language of rights is okay, but we have to also remember that that is still a Eurocentric concept and conversation. It's not that, you know, it's not for us to say that nature has rights. Maybe nature should be wondering if we have rights. Quite frankly, we can all disappear from the earth. We could destroy ourselves, and nature will do much better without us than it is with us. So rather than us thinking of bestowing rights to nature, a very hierarchical position, we should be begging nature to give us the rights to live within it.
Thank you so much for that helpful answer. I'm gonna create a video clip of that to share with other people. It's terrific. We have a question in the audience for Jennifer. How did you come to use the scientific and technical concepts, which for many can be off-putting, to then employ them in meaningful ways to help us explore our own natures and possibilities? Want to tackle that?
Thank you so much for this question, Dr. Mumford. I am wondering, I'm wondering myself how I came to this. I'm not sure exactly. I am not sure. I think that to me, it's essential to be constantly reaching out for more connections and to do the work of interdisciplinarity as a kind of way of heart, a way of life, a way of spirit, and a way of being. Recognizing our interconnectedness is something that is natural to me and comes naturally to me, but also is, I think, very much a part of womanist ethic, to be and to express and to live and to research in holistic and integrated ways, not to subdivide or compartmentalize. And so ultimately, it means sometimes taking things literally that others take figuratively. Sometimes taking things figuratively that other folks take literally. but I think for sure it means getting over our fear of science. It means for sure getting over our fear of math and other kinds of research that is often considered outside of liberal arts and the religious proper, recognizing that great theologians, great ethicists, great spiritual leaders have often incorporated their understanding, their appreciation of nature and of the sciences as a way of gaining deeper understanding and appreciation of the divine and of the divine in us and in our midst. Of course, this will sound natural to natural law aficionados and experts, and so I think that just kind of going back to that, but going back to that in new ways that do not reify and codify some of the racism, classism, and sexism that have been part of some of those traditions.
Thanks so much for that response. That was terrific. And even as a non-scientist, I appreciate that response. Rudy, I have a question for you. You know, where I really appreciate your use of the straw example. I was wondering if you can, give us another example, another kind of specific real life thing that I encounter in the Cleveland area. We deal a lot with lead poisoning. In Cleveland, it's not so much water, but from paint and housing. And one of the arguments frequently made in the media is that people should care about this because lead makes people more violent, right? And it has. How would you coach people on, on how to put forth or to talk about these things in a way that isn't reinforcing kind of problematic views? Do you have some coaching on that?
Yeah, no, I have some. I believe part of it too is it's okay to mention the harm. And so I don't know, I haven't done in terms of the research with the violence with the lead exposure. So I can't speak on that. Though I would also, makes me think of kind of the stereotypes of people with who are disabled of being violent, or in terms of with someone's mental capacity. But part of the coaching is like, yes, you can name what's happening, but what's the focus? Like, why is it motivating? In that example, it's using people can become violent as to motivate people rather than to what's being done to the person or to the community, and also focus on why is this happening? Because again, in that, it's very individualistic about the person rather than the larger community, and also how has this come about, and kind of where should the focus lie? And so one is, again, it's all right to mention the effects of lead, but if that is the sole thing that's used to motivate, then that's when it becomes problematic, because it's using the fear, right? A fear of becoming disabled, or a fear of one's change in one's embodiment as really a motivator. And so one is how can you really frame it differently and focus on the other aspects of why it's happening, or what communities it's happening to. So that would be just a start.
Thank you so much for that. A question for any of our panelists is, if, again, it's kind of in a way going back to the preacher, but recognizing in the Christian tradition, what do we need to know about how scripturally the water has been conceived of, because there's maybe, are there some hidden gems there that if we haven't been preaching and talking much about water in our own faith, maybe what do we need to know? If I'm like, oh, I've never thought about Christianity and a caring for water, is there some scripture that is a good place for people to begin with as they enter into that? Miguel, you look like you're jumping in. All right.
Well, I can't help myself. Definitely one of my favorite verses is Jesus making wine out of water. Just that the joy of having a good time, the joy of the party, rooted in water, but also making wine out of it. And I think sometimes when we look at scripture, we try to take the joy out of it. Somehow it's sinful to dance. Somehow it's sinful to have a good cup of wine. I mean, and I think that we could that transformation begins with water to something good. I'm sorry, that's the first thing that came to my mind when you asked the question, and that is having a drink of wine.
I like that. That is good. It is good to have some joy, and you're lifting that up brings some joy to me. I think what's really especially important for this book is that it connects to real life movements that have been so important in recent years. We've had movement in Flint, we've had movement in Standing Rock. There's also movements that don't get the media exposure but are going on in communities throughout the country. I'm just be curious to hear from each of you how you connect your passions with particular movements, and in your working on this book, how you're connecting that to particular movements and that passion for justice and that sacred call we have. Any one of you would like to jump in on that?
Let me just say quickly, as my colleagues gather their thoughts, that one of the things we try to do in this project and in the next one that we're working on is to not just have some eggheads talking to each other about abstract thoughts and creating these beautiful interwinding ideas, but rather to truly be liberationists in our thinking, and where everything we did was rooted in the social location of the people who are suffering. So in the book, we talk about Standing Rock. In the book, we talk about Flint. We talk about real lives and real problems. And then from that, we try to figure out what are we called to do. So this becomes the very methodology of the book. And here I'm being very biased, to do any type of ethics or any type of theology disconnected with the plight of the most oppressed really is an insult to God, is an insult to Christianity. And I would even say it makes Jesus vomit. I mean, we have to do our work rooted in the plight of the least among us.
I would just like to kind of jump in on that, and it's fascinating to think to think on one hand of the gross materiality of the vomiting of Jesus, which is a liquidified form, right, of expulsion, and how that is related to that transformed version of water as wine, that we don't even think of as one of water's forms. It's not included in my chapter here on the forms that water takes up, but it is a form of water, and I think that it's really interesting to kind of just spin this out a little bit further, and perhaps now you can tell I'm a bit of a preacher. Too much wine does cause vomit. And I think that it is the greed of people around water that has produced a sickening circumstance with respect to water. And I'd just like to name this truth that Catherine Clinton calls out of the life of Harriet Tubman, where she notes that Tubman confided that she had observed that all the streams she knew ran north to south. And this is part of how she knew which direction to go, how to travel toward and for freedom. And to me, this connects with the present day in terms of how people are migrating and how people will increasingly be migrating following water, migrating following clean, fresh water, migrating looking at the flow of water and where the flow of water is flowing clean, where it's flowing clear, where it is flowing free. This will be the direction. And people will read as Tubman read, people will read knowing not to overconsume to the point of vomiting, but also knowing that we do need the transformative power that takes water into a new direction, even beyond the forms of the substance that we know to our natural minds.
Dr. Leith, can I, sorry, Brooks, can I pull that observation back around to Brooks' question about biblical imagery of water? And what you've just put together has painted such a clear picture in my mind of the waterways and the pathways through the Red Sea in the Exodus. And I can picture almost as though God has set glass in the middle and the water climbs up the sides and moves its way up, and that's how the pathway is cleared for the people. And God does the thing. God changes the very direction of the water, and that's how people know to take that direction.
Yes, and after God has also transformed water to blood. And so, I mean, there are multiple things that are happening, I think, in the scriptural text, at least in terms of this transformation of water and the movement of water and how it is leading in liberating ways, but also, as I try to name, that it can have oppressive functions as well, and it can be a sign and symbol of the same. Awesome possibilities with water when we dip into it.
Jennifer, one of the things I really appreciate about your chapter is, as you just indicated, those references to those historical figures who have gone before us and have done so much in the struggle, such as Harriet Tubman. And I guess a question for Miguel and Rudy is, are there historical persons in the struggle or persons currently in the struggle that for you are kind of guiding lights of inspiration that you look to in this work and come to mind?
So this is Rudy. So I'll say briefly, I think Eli Clare's work, particularly in his poetry, but his work with thinking of disability and the environment and care and cure, I think is one is needed. So his work is very much there. And I would say those who are in the disability rights movement, just countless people there who are working to make sure that disabled people are not overlooked in these ones, or are the burdens of policies to try to correct environmental destruction. And so those are the people I really look to and think about in terms of that for your question. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much. Miguel?
I would say there's a group of people, and then I would say there is a person. The group of people, I don't know their names. They're the ones that are standing at Standing Rock. They're the ones who are in Flint, Michigan, organizing for clean water. I have no idea what their names are. There's so many. And that's shame on me for not knowing their names, but they're the ones that are bringing these issues to light and are making the changes that need to be made. So for them, they're the ones that are the inspiration to the kind of book like this that we are doing. And then the other one, who some may argue is for real or is not for real, I'm going to argue that she is for real, and that is Ochun, the goddess of the waters, because her story or stories really have influenced me in how I have learned to treat water and deal with water.
Thank you for both of those answers. A question we have is, with this conversation, how are there one or two or three ways that people can move this conversation forward? What are ways that people can bring this conversation to their community and keep it going? Any thoughts that you would have just on the practical uses of this book and what all that it generates?
Let me quickly just say that I've just finished reading the study for another project I'm working on that talks about water insecurity in the United States, which is a concept that is beyond most Americans. When we think of water insecurity, we think of these villages somewhere far off in some other continent. But here, the richest, most powerful nation the world has ever witnessed, we're talking about a moment where we're going to turn on a faucet and not be able to have clean water. So if you're asking what can we be doing for our very survival, for our selfish survival, I think every church must lead in this conversation, so that our next generation can have water. And of course, let's not all be too selfish, and also recognize that what we're about to experience, the rest of the world have been experienced for a long time now, and we have an obligation as well to that.
I would just add that as folks are reading this text, I hope that you will read it with water. I hope that you will read it almost ritualistically, that you will have water by you, that you will look at it, that you will touch it, that you will taste it, that you will feel it, that you will engage with it as you are reading this text, that you might consider the plight of those who already cannot turn on the faucet and drink clean water, and who already are damaged because of the water they have consumed, and those who are recognizing their need for new and rehydration.
And the thing that I would say too, in terms of, if we're thinking about water, the other image in terms of the Christian faith that comes to mind is baptism. And then very much in my Episcopal tradition, we have the Baptismal Covenant, which you agree to seek and serve Christ in all person and love your neighbor as yourself. And so if it is through water that we enter that baptismal vocation, then it makes sense that we then also should be concerned about how water is used in the world, and to follow through in terms of the lead or different things, and the fact that people don't have water, to pay attention that if it's water that through the baptism that we came through life, that we then should be concerned about how water is used for the life of others.
Thank you very much, one and all. I want to thank my colleague Brooks Barrett, who's the Minister for Environmental Justice in the United Church of Christ, for facilitating some conversation around this important work and effort, not just the book, but so much beyond it. Thank you very much to soon-to-be doctor, if I understand correctly, Rudy Reyes, who is a student of and a professor of social ethics and Latinx studies, Dr. Jennifer Leith, who's an assistant professor of religion and social justice and the director of the Masters of Social Justice and Ethics at ILIF, and also the editor and the author of Gonna Trouble the Water, Dr. Miguel de Torre, who's tenured in social ethics and Latinx studies at ILIF. Again, the book is Gonna Trouble the Water, Ecojustice, Water, and Environmental Racism. You can find it at thepilgrimpress.com or wherever you buy your books. And if this conversation is this conversation is such a rich taste of all the ways that Gonna Trouble the Water challenges us and brings us into holy space in conversation about what life calls us to together, not just humanity, but all the world and all of creation. So thank you each and all. Chris.
I have to say, my goodness, to be at a place where we can imagine in and through academia, through spirit, and through a clarion call to organize to for water is life, you know, especially in this particular moment, the boiling point, if you will, of neoliberal capitalism and the work that we can collectively do together. I have pieces that I can, pieces of conversation and pieces of thought that each of you have offered that I know I will be ruminating on for months to follow. So it is with deep gratitude to each one of you for being here and for offering that and beyond. And for folks watching, whether you're watching with us live or you're watching in the recording, if this conversation has moved you as it's moved me and so many others, please consider donating into the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. I also want to make sure that I let you know what else is upcoming in our series. On Tuesday, we are going to talk economic justice, particularly through the lens of motherhood, with Reverend Sakina Hamlin in Mind the Gap Motherhood. And then on the 6th, I know that African American women in ministry are leading a conversation called Sisterhood, the Work Our Soul Requires. And from there, a conversation on Tuesday about where do we go from here? The here, you will find out as we get closer. From all of that, and with deep gratitude, I want to invite Dr. De La Torre to close us in prayer.
Of course. El Dios de la liberación, le pedimos por él, no solamente para nuestra humanidad sea libre, pero también la naturaleza. And for those who have yet to learn the language of the angels, I will translate. The God of liberation, I pray not only for the power to bring forth freedom to humans, but just as important to nature. Amen.
Siblings in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed as you continue your day. Know that you are not alone, and we are holding you in prayer. Amen.